Jon Wilcoxson recently retired from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, where he held a variety of positions, including Assistant State Highway Engineer and Director of Maintenance. He was active with the Federal Highway Pavement Preservation Expert Task Group, the Southeast Pavement Preservation Partnership, and the AASHTO Committee on Maintenance. He currently works as Senior Research Engineer at the University of Kentucky College of Engineering.
As John said earlier, I retired from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet last fall and just recently started a new job with the Kentucky Transportation Center at the University of Kentucky. And during my previous career, I spent about 10 years in our pavement management section before moving on to a role as Director of Maintenance and then later Assistant State Highway Engineer. But those early days kind of formed my love for preservation and pavement preservation, and is why I'm really glad to be here today and appreciate Judith and Patty reaching out to me to be a part of the conference. FHWA Pavement Preservation Technical Feedback Group includes members from public transportation agencies, industry, and academia focused on advancing and improving the state of practice in pavement preservation. And in 2017, I was part of the group, which at that time was still called the Pavement Preservation Expert Task Group. And one of the first efforts we undertook was development of a top 10 list of characteristics of a world-class pavement preservation program. And the idea was to make something similar to the quick check of your highway network health that some of you may recall, but with a specific focus on pavement preservation. At the time, I think Judith Corley-Lay was still with North Carolina DOT, and she put together a survey that was distributed across several subject matter expert groups. And as I recall, it included a lot of free form, too much by making it multiple choice. And the challenge, of course, then is taking all of those responses from everyone and condensing it down into a coherent list. And as you can imagine, Judith was great at doing that. She took that and a couple of others of us that were on this kind of subcommittee that we formed helped condense that down to a list of 10 items. And then Judith took that and wrote an article for the Pavement Preservation Journal, which was published in the winter 2017 edition. And I've got a slide at the end, or I've got a link at the end of the presentation to that article. Subsequently, there have been several articles identifying specific agencies that across the country that embody some of the items on the list. We haven't gotten through all 10 of the items yet. I think we did about 6 or 7 before the pandemic hit last year and everyone's focus kind of shifted. But that may be something that we pick back up later. I'm sure that the journal would be interested in doing that. What I plan to do today is I'm going to quickly flesh out each of the items on the top 10 list and then give you some takeaways that hopefully will be helpful to you regardless of how mature your own program is. Now, I'm not going to read this list off to you right now, but I wanted to include this slide just to make it easy to reference in case anyone's looking at it later, but we'll go through them one at a time on the following slides. And one thing I do want to stress is that this isn't meant to cover everything that could make a program successful. There are probably other things that agencies are doing which aren't included, but which are contributing to their success. And if anyone has examples, I'd love to hear that. And I said early on that it would be great if, when we publish this list, if there would be heated arguments over things that we left off the list. I haven't had that yet, but I'm still looking forward to that possibility. Generally, we didn't want to try to list the 10 items with a particular ranking. We felt that was going to be a bit too subjective and not necessarily helpful. We did notice, though, that one item was consistently listed at the top of most responses, and that was that the program has dedicated and consistent funding. So we did list this one as number 1, but the rest of them are more random in how they appear within the list. Dedicated funding obviously means that the funds can't be diverted into non-preservation programs. You don't want your preservation funding to go toward adding lanes or new construction. And then consistent funding just means that it's reasonably similar from one year to the next. But if you're just getting started, there has to be some growth. Technically, $0 every year would be consistent, but you don't want that. So the trick is to grow the budget in a way that matches your program's maturity. You want to increase funding level as you're able to take it on, both from an industry and an internal expertise perspective. You don't want to suddenly, it may seem exciting if you were to suddenly get $30 million the first year you kick off a program, but then it's kind of like the dog that caught the car. What do you do with that then? And if you don't have, if you haven't developed the expertise internally, if you don't have the contractors that are familiar with the treatments, you're probably going to run into some issues with that. So as you're starting out, you want to grow your program slowly, but you do want to have some growth. Having it be consistent over time allows the industry to maintain their expertise, because they're not only seeing these projects every 3 to 5 years. And also helps to justify some investments that they may be making in equipment. Our second item was support from all levels of the agency. Obviously, you want your leadership to be supportive so they can advocate for funding and they can address problems that may arise. You want them to have a basic understanding at minimum of the program, so that if they get a question or an issue comes up, they're able to provide a response rather than having to come to the subject matter experts. You also need your staff that are making project selections to know what types of treatments are going to work best in specific situations. When I was with KYTC, I focused a lot on those first two items. And where I think I fell short was having good communication with our inspection staff and our material experts. And I recognize now that that's something that early on I should have done more to enhance that communication, because that lack of communication led to some initial challenges that had to be overcome, and would have gone a lot smoother if I'd done more outreach at the beginning. And subsequently, the cabinet has made a concerted effort to improve that communication and training for inspectors. They've hired dedicated staff specifically to assist with project oversight and improvement of material specifications for the preservation treatments. And I think this has really done a lot to improve both the quality of the final product and the support that the program has throughout the cabinet. One of the things that we noted that you want to have is an agency champion, someone who's going to be pushing preservation for you. I note that this is most important early on in the growth of a program. Hopefully, all of our programs will mature to the point that you don't need that anymore, that it just becomes a standard operating procedure, that this is just how things work. And you don't need an advocate quite to the extent that you do early on. But in the beginning, you're going to need someone who's that person who is educating staff, doing outreach to industry, and is the go-to person whenever any questions arise. Some other groups that you may not immediately think of, but which can be very helpful in growing your program, are public relations staff, fiscal management and budgeting, design staff. Remember that, oftentimes decisions are going to be made that may affect the preservation program, but your agency champion or other people in your pavement management staff may not be in the room when those decisions are being made. And if you have done a lot of outreach and you've educated a broad cross-section of your agency, there's a good chance that someone in that room will say, "Oh, don't forget about preservation. We've got to keep them in mind." The third item on the list is project selection based on objective data, proven guidelines, and network economics. Carlos mentioned yesterday the importance of showing how decisions are driven by the data. And it shouldn't be surprising that if the public thinks project selection is primarily a political process, they're not going to be inclined to support additional funding for those efforts. So showing that you're making business decisions based on the most economical approach should help increase support, not only for the preservation program, but perhaps even for broader agency initiatives. If they can see that, yes, this is a agency that is a good steward of taxpayer funding, that may prove beneficial when you're trying to do other things beyond preservation. Equally important is that having project selection based on objective data is that you're going to improve the results of your projects if you're taking a more scientific approach to your selection. And at first, you're not going to be able to demonstrate performance based on local data. You may not even be able to show a cost savings at first due to the economics of your small scale operations. And if you're introducing new treatments, you're likely going to have, you're either going to have contractors who haven't done this before, and so they've got to build in some risk into their bids, or from outside your area, and then they have expenses related to travel costs. And so early on, you need to set the expectation within your agency that a lot of these projects may not be more cost effective than what you're doing right now due to those startup costs. But you need to work through that and gain some expertise, and those costs will come down over time. The fourth item is that the agency uses a variety of treatments covering a range of conditions. You don't want to just have one or two treatment options. And ideally, you'll have several treatment options with some that overlap different stages of pavement conditions. Sometimes you want to be able to focus on a pavement that's in fair to perhaps poor condition, but maybe you missed the opportunity for one of your treatments. Well, having a variety of treatments available means that, well, now that it's deteriorated a little bit further, I still have something that I can do to treat this pavement that I missed last year. Another thing is that during lean budget years, last year, early on in the pandemic, our revenue in Kentucky dropped significantly, and we were doing a lot of cost cutting. We were delaying projects. Having a broad cross section gives you a lot of flexibility. Maybe you focus on your very low cost treatments during those years. And then in better years, maybe you increase the number of more expensive treatments, thin overlays, or other types of treatments that may cost more. So having a variety of options also allows you to address local concerns if aesthetics or other non-engineering issues come into play. So ideally, we'd always apply the most cost-effective treatment based on the physical conditions at a given location, but we know that we don't always get to do that. And having a lot of options available means that the second best treatment may still be a great choice. And then finally, having a variety of treatments may help improve competitiveness if you have the ability to bid multiple treatments as alternates on a given project. Number 5 is knowledgeable agency and contract personnel assigned to every project. For some preservation treatments, the construction process can be highly dependent on conditions. Temperature, humidity can have a big impact on the success of a project, and having someone on staff that's experienced and can make adjustments quickly rather than having to contact central office or worse, not contacting anyone at all is better, because they can address those issues as they arise rather than learning about it later that they should have done something. It also helps to reduce frustration that you may have with contractors and staff. When things go wrong on a project, it's easy for people to start pointing fingers and get frustrated with the program. And until contractors develop some expertise, agencies will often have to depend on their own personnel having the knowledge to ensure successful projects. It can be a bit of a catch-22 since an agency trying a new treatment may not have any firsthand experience on either side. And that's why training is so important and needs to be made available early and often for both contractors and agency personnel. And if you're trying something for the first time, maybe reach out to your colleagues in your regional partnership and ask for advice. And if your agency allows you to travel, try to go watch a project that's in a neighboring city or state. Number 6 is that a pavement management system is used to track distress, identify needs, and select candidate projects. If you're using a pavement management system, it gives you an opportunity to do more than just plan for next year. Instead, you can identify trends in network conditions that allow you to proactively address the needs. And one example I often use, some of you may have heard this before, is in Kentucky, we have a parkway system it's kind of like an intrastate system. It's about 500 centerline miles of 4-lane highways, 4-lane divided highways with fully controlled access. In 2007, about 25%, we had a lot of needs, and 25% of that parkway system was resurfaced in 1 year, which was great, except we all recognized that that meant in 11, 12, 13 years, all of that 25% was going to come due again. As that date approached in 2017, 2018, our preservation program had developed enough and we had enough support for it that we were able to start identifying those projects that were going to be coming due in a year or two, do some preservation treatments to push those out a little bit further and kind of flatten that tidal wave of needs that was going to be coming toward us. So I think that's a really good example of a way to strategically address your program. You also are going to be able to identify candidate projects that may have not been readily apparent on first blush looking at them. The management system also is going to allow you to do an analysis of your performance and your costs, which in the end is going to help you improve your program further as you mature. Number 7, the pavement preservation is part of the agency's asset management plan. As I'm sure everyone knows, MAP 21 and later the FAST Act required that all states have a TAMP. And in some instances, I'm sure that the TAMP may not be utilized within a state as much as it could be, but ideally it should be a tool that describes how your major assets are going to be maintained over the long term. And if it's being used properly, then the funding requirements for pavement preservation should be part of the plan. At Kentucky, after our TAMP was finalized, whenever I was asked by leadership, how much do we need for pavements? How much funding do we have? The number in the plan. But I'd always provide a qualifier that number was only valid if we're allowed to spend some of it on cost-effective preservation projects. And I would say if you don't give us the flexibility in how to spend the money, then we're either going to need more money or we'll have to accept that pavements will get in worse condition. And that's the advantage of incorporating your preservation into your TAMP, is that it documents that need and that risk of using a worst first approach. Number 8 is that stakeholders are educated and informed about the benefits of the program. So if you can demonstrate to the public that their roads are going to get treated more quickly and are going to stay in fair to good condition for longer, then you can go a long way toward addressing concerns they may have with the type of treatment being applied. It's also important to engage public officials about your program so they can be prepared if they get specific questions about a project. Keep in mind that people don't usually call public officials to give them compliments about a project. So you may have 5 successful preservation projects in a particular city before the mayor or other officials even know that the program exists. And if the first time they hear about it is on the 6th project when something goes wrong, then you've missed an opportunity to gain an advocate for your program. And so it's a good idea wherever possible to look for those opportunities to inform public officials. You also want to have a broad range of internal staff who are aware of the program and who can identify opportunities that might otherwise be missed. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, that having people in the room when these discussions are happening that impact your program is important. Having those people be educated about the program. And finally, if the public is already aware of the overall program goes, it's going to make it easier to explain issues related to individual projects as they come up. And number 9, the agency has a well-documented material specifications, testing, and approval program or process, I think that's supposed to say. Having a good material specification program helps reduce uncertainty for contractors. If specifications aren't clear, then contractors a certain amount of risk into their bids, and that's going to increase costs, but it doesn't necessarily add value for the agency. Making sure that you're clear about what your specifications are will help reduce that risk. It also decreases the potential for failure of projects. And then it can allow for improved efficiency and cost savings. Early on, you may have very rigid specifications because you want to make sure that you don't have any failures. And as your program matures and you're slightly less risk averse, you may be able to identify materials that you can use that will increase your efficiency and save you money. It's important to engage the industry. This is something that Mark Woods with Tennessee DOT pointed out in his one of the follow-up articles that we did, is that engaging the industry is important because ultimately, they're going to be the ones that put the material on the road. They're the ones that have the familiarity with what can be done and what can't. And it's easy as an agency to make assumptions about availability of material that just aren't realistic. So where possible, you want to engage the industry, but also understand that they may have other motivations when they provide that feedback. So you want to work with them, but also engage other subject matter experts as well. And number 10 is that performance is tracked and used to modify your preservation plans. As I mentioned previously, an agency just starting out isn't going to have a history of performance from which they can set expectations about how long certain treatments are going to last. And they're going to have to rely on averages at first. As the program matures, they'll have a better idea of how they work for them specifically, but there's still going to be a wide variation from the average. You're going to have some that perform a lot better and some a lot worse. And if you're tracking your performance closely, you'll be able to distinguish between those good performing projects and those that aren't, and hopefully identify characteristics that are impacting that performance. And you can fine tune your program to get better results overall. Finally, being able to document successful projects helps to offset any concerns that may come up when a failure arises. We all know that failures can happen on any project, even with common treatments that you've used thousands of times. But in those instances, everyone's aware that those are the exceptions. And by documenting the performance of your preservation projects, you'll be able to provide context when those issues come up. Real quickly, I put a kind of a scoring mechanism on here, but I didn't want to be very precise with this because it's not precise. Basically showing where you may be with your program. If you're just starting out and you've got one or two of these items that apply to your agency, you're likely not providing a lot of tangible benefits yet. As you increase, you're going to provide some benefits, but maybe you're not an integral part of the overall agency success. Then when you get to an advanced program, you are being an integral component of your agency's performance. And a world-class program is going to provide obvious benefits to the agency, and it's going to be an example for other programs within the agency itself. If you're a beginning program, I just want to say focus on learning to apply and inspect new treatments correctly for your location. Don't worry immediately about getting the most cost-effective project and expect failures. And then on the other end, just in the interest of time, world-class program, if you find yourself in this category, don't rest on your laurels. Continue to assess the program performance and goals and demonstrate how effective that program is. That's going to help others. And be a mentor for other agencies. Look for opportunities to train neighboring states, neighboring cities, and help them to grow their programs. And finally, I just want quick acknowledgement and thanks to all the people on this list. Judith, of course, for her help in writing the article early on. Steve and Richard were part of that committee. Larry with the National Center, and Jim and Tom for providing us a venue to publish the results. And then there's the link for the article. Thank you all.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.